Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. I had a great response from listeners who wrote to tell me what their first kiss with horror was. I read a few of the responses on the last episode. I'm going to add a few more here. Kim said her first kiss was Alien. She watched it on HBO at her grandparents' house late at night when she was about 8 years old. It ruined her sleep for years. Kim, all I can say is welcome to the tribe, and wow, nothing like starting at expert level. Tim wrote in and said his first kiss was the original Friday the 13th. Tim, the original Friday the 13th was the punk rock of horror movies. And then I got this one from Brian. I'm going to read this in his words. I would say that my first kiss would have to be Dario Argento's Creepers. It was the first video that I rented on my own as a latchkey kid, and it really woke me up to a new kind of film. While I've already been accustomed to the more mainstream stuff since I was way younger, thanks to my horror-loving mom, Creepers was the first one that really clicked for me and drew me into the world of Italian horror. I really like that recollection. Brian mentions that his mother was a horror lover as well. It's great when I hear someone talk about how they had someone in their family that got it when they were young, someone who was a voice that mattered, someone who legitimized their passion. However, for most of us, we needed to go elsewhere for that validation. I mentioned that my father introduced me to the horror films he liked as a kid, but he wasn't a horror guy. He liked comedies and westerns. So my dad didn't understand my love for horror, and I can kind of understand his reservations because I was weird. I was a scaredy cat that liked to get scared. I'd beg and plead to see a horror film on TV. Then my poor dad would have to deal with my nightmares after I watched it, which were like clockwork. And then he had to deal with me the next day, begging to see another horror movie. Why I stayed a fan over the years is anybody's guess. When my friends reached a certain age, they kind of grew out of horror and moved into other things. When they lost interest, I lost a valuable outlet for my thoughts and my daydreams. So for me, there came a time in my life where being a horror fan was a solitary pursuit. If you want to keep that passion burning, it's up to you. For me, I found my fuel at the public library. I read horror fiction there, but I also got introduced to horror reference books. They were full of information about movies I never even heard of. I had a library card with a 7-book per week limit. I had 20/20 vision. I had an obsessive-compulsive brain. I may never be heard from again. So I'm alone with my thoughts, building up this database of names and movies that would be useless currency for anyone I'd normally have conversations with. But then comes a day when you finally meet a fellow freak who's been stoking his own solitary campfire. And before you know it, you're both drinking off a fire hose of information. You're talking passions, you're talking your loves, your theories. Before you know it, you look around to see the sun has gone down and you're very late for dinner. Now that experience is the Rosetta Stone. It's the key element that every fan convention has ever tried to recreate. Now, I've never been much of a joiner, but I tend to find other non-joiners, and we, ironically, form clubs. And that brings me to talk about how I found myself entering the world of horror conventions, and how a chance encounter at one of these conventions led me to Strongsville, Ohio, to come face-to-face with a self-proclaimed anti-convention known as Cinema Wasteland, and how, if you're like me, you just might find yourself making a pilgrimage to the suburbs of Cleveland. Now I'm a relative newcomer to horror conventions. In fact, the renewed vigor of which I'm going at this horror passion is pretty newfound. I became a solitary fan once again when I moved to San Francisco about 20 years ago. I never stopped watching or reading horror, but it was in the background for several years. I didn't talk about it much, mainly because there weren't a lot of people I knew who could or would talk about horror. If you're into science fiction, comic books, and gaming, B-movies, steampunk, Burning Man. San Francisco is your town. However, if you're looking for horror in particular, you have to do some searching. Now, I had gone to several science fiction and comic book conventions here over the years. Invariably, you'd find 3 or 4 vendors that specialized in horror. They'd be huddled in a corner like tuberculosis patients, and they always sell the same old things. Sell being the key word there. Because when you're paying over $1,000 for a vendor table, you're going to be pushing the product. And small talk is the death of commerce. Of course, what I wanted out of these conventions was conversation, engaged conversation. So I found conventions to be fun but impersonal spectacles. So how did I go from a Silicon Valley guy whose artistic outlet was over-decorating for Halloween to a guy talking through a microphone that chases down conventions like I have a gambler's high? Maybe it was that the voice inside me that yearned to create just couldn't be silenced anymore. Whatever it was, I was compelled to fly from San Francisco to Chicago for my first horror convention, solo, not knowing anyone. One objective: start conversations about horror with real horror fans. This was a 3-day convention in a hotel. I was aware that if this thing sucked, I was trapped. So a little history about fan conventions in general and horror conventions in particular. All conventions, no matter what the theme, pretty much follow the same general format. The weekend theme is built around a movie from the past, usually a nostalgic favorite that has broad appeal. Cast and crew members are invited as special guests. They usually do at least one Q&A about the movie at a special screening. The rest of the time, the special guests are moved from place to place by their handlers. The special guests spend a large amount of the weekend at meet and greet tables inside of the vendor's room. They sign autographs for fans. The starting rate for an autograph is usually $20, but it can go up to $40 or even $50 if the guest is a big enough name. The largest room at any conference is the vendor's room, and it stays open until the evening. The room is packed with people selling memorabilia and films and unique tchotchkes. When the vendor's room closes, most conventions offer programming to keep conventioners engaged. It can be cosplay or showing movies. Sometimes they even have small concerts. The special guests are what push ticket sales, but the vendor's room is the centerpiece. Depending on the convention, it can be the vortex that sucks everything else into it. I've attended WonderCon in the Moscone Center in San Francisco, and the vendor's room was 700,000 square feet. It basically had its own moon and gravitational pull. It's easy to feel very small in there. Horror conventions tend to run smaller than the Comic-Cons and WonderCons of the world, but the basic setup is the same. So back to the horror convention in Chicago. I picked this one because John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween was the featured movie. I figured that the fans would skew a little older, so they would probably be able to talk more horror history with me. I started to feel the whole thing might be a wash, though, when I was waiting in a very long line to speak with one of the special guests. We were lined down a hallway. Security guards walked the line. They blocked the door. I figured this is a perfect time to talk horror. I mean, we're a captive audience. The guy in front of me had a huge stack of memorabilia and $20 bills in his hands. See, you get 1 or 2 memorabilia autographs for that $20 fee. If you want more, it's another $20 per item. I knew that this stuff that he had would be selling on eBay by the end of the day. Of course, the special guest would know that too. I'm sure he'd be friendly, but he'd probably feel that the moment was more of a transaction than a fan meeting, and he'd meet this type of guy again and again and again through the entire conference. From what I saw, all the special guests were very sweet, and they seemed genuinely touched by the response. But the handlers were pushing people through at a fast clip. It felt like a sausage factory. Hey, the lines are long, and those $20 bills might go to another line if you don't move fast. Now, I don't want to sound too negative about the convention in Chicago. I was entertained. The QA sessions were very good, and the selection of movies being shown throughout the day were pretty strong picks. And I got to see Halloween outdoors in Illinois. That's a geek orgasm. Now, I've been to enough conventions to know that long lines and a focus on autographs are pretty standard practice. But I found that most of the attendees that I was meeting, they were more interested in autographs and commerce than really striking up conversations. So I spent time with the vendors. I usually pick vendors who make their own stuff. So I talked to folks who just made their first horror movie and they were trying to drum up viewers. I had a great time talking with photographer Jim Sorfleet and model Kat McGill of SNS Photo. They specialize in creating beautifully crafted crime scene photo recreations. I took some of their art home with me. However, I was really looking to be inspired at this convention. I was looking for a game changer. So I started cruising the perimeter of the hotel after hours, looking for usual suspects. I noticed a conspicuous group of 7 or 8 guys in the hotel lobby sitting in a circle. They were talking at a respectable level. They were listening to each other. This looked promising. I asked if they were talking movies, and they warily said, yes. I sat down. I later found out that they were waiting to hear what came out of my mouth. If I started with Saw or Paranormal Activity, they'd politely nod, then go back to their conversations. I started out by listening to them. It was obvious they knew their shit. I could feel the excitement of getting into a really challenging discussion starting to well up. I dove into the fray. Trying to describe the conversations we had in any detail, it would be like trying to discuss all the musical notes in an improvised jam session with musicians. Even if you somehow got it right, the result would be far less interesting. What I will say is this: just like when musicians jam together and it comes off sweet, we fed off each other's enthusiasm. It felt like we'd been playing together for years. And it only took a few minutes to know we needed to play together again. We riffed on the work of Dan Curtis and Val Lewton and took on Tobe Hooper and Wes Craven. We cranked up the 70s made-for-TV horror movies like Killdozer and Gargoyles and Satan's Triangle. We debated which director lost his mojo the most, what books terrified us, what movies were underrated. At some point in the conversation, I was asked a philosophical question. I started talking, and I suddenly felt everyone in the group lean in just a little to listen. Ooh, I guess this is my solo. Before we knew it, the sun was starting to come up, and we were going to be late for breakfast. So what makes a good convention? Moments like that, connection and camaraderie. I didn't know it at the time, but I had just jammed with what I call the Algonquin Round Table of Horror, and we wanted to jam again. Unfortunately, this is the last night of the conference, so plans started getting made on what the next conference would be that everyone might attend. Each of them started to talk about the best conference for guys like us out there. They said, hey, it's a smaller conference than this, but everyone there is a hardcore fan. It's like a family you get to visit every 6 months. You need to go to Cinema Wasteland. Get your ass to Cleveland. Get your ass to Cinema Wasteland. I found out that all these guys are from the Midwest. I was on the West Coast, and going to Cleveland for a horror conference sounded daunting. I said I'd have to think about it. I said my goodbyes, and we all said we'd connect on Facebook. When I got back to the Bay Area, I went back to my normal life. I figured I'd bask in the energy boost I got from the Chicago conference, chat every so often with some of the guys on social media, and that'd be it. But something got loose from its cage in me. I realized how much passion I still had for this stuff. It seemed ridiculous to pretend I didn't. It seemed ridiculous to pretend I didn't want to go. Hell, you only live once. I decided to do some research on Cinema Wasteland. What I found sparked my curiosity so much, I booked a flight for Cleveland. Cinema Wasteland is the brainchild of Ken Kish and his wife Pam. It's a movie and memorabilia expo that's held in April and October each year at the Holiday Inn in Strongsville, Ohio. It's been in the same place since their first show in 2000. That's 29 shows to date. You may have noticed I called it a show and not a convention. Ken only refers to Cinema Wasteland as a show. Ken's a no-nonsense, straight-shooting guy. In an online interview with MrFrights.com, Ken said, "You can't even spell the word convention without using the word con, and I don't con anyone into anything." If Cinema Wasteland could be called anything else, it'd be the anti-convention. It's advertised as 3 days of films and fun celebrating the drive-in era of horror and sci-fi movies. It's also the crowning achievement of a career spent giving the finger to corporate convention promoters by making a show that puts the fans first and still have it be successful. He's a lifelong drive-in and exploitation movie fan, and he makes each show a celebration, the kind of show he would want to attend. Ken says he's just the guy having more fun running a show than any promoter has the right to have. Ken started out with a collector's video service called Video Wasteland in 1987. They specialized in rare, out-of-print, and just hard-to-find drive-in horror and exploitation films. In the early 90s, Ken added movie posters and memorabilia to the mix, and he headed on the road to work conventions across the country. He saw firsthand the attitudes of the big shows and what he felt they got wrong for fans. So, at your standard con, you pay an admission fee, which can be $100 and more for a weekend pass. And then there's hidden fees, to attend parties or fees for early admission. Cinema Wasteland keeps the weekend pass price low enough for working families. There are no hidden fees, and every attendee is treated equally. There's no cultural elite here. At your standard con, you buy additional tickets to get photos with some of the special guests. They can be $50. Sometimes you even get assigned a meeting time, and you have to come back to stand in a slightly smaller line. And if you just go to a few cons, you'll start to notice they all get the same special guests over and over again. Now, Cinema Wasteland, this isn't the place to go if you're looking for an autograph from Kane Hodder or Doug Bradley or William Shatner. Ken gets celebrities that come because they want to be there and want to spend time with their fans. A lot of these guys are drive-in and exploitation legends that a lot of people wouldn't know by name, but obsessives like me would. It's all about the fans, and if a guest doesn't fit the Cinema Wasteland mold, they don't get invited back. A case in point, Ken strongly suggests that autograph prices don't exceed $20. A certain celebrity came in and charged $30, and legend has it that Ken told him off in the middle of the crowded vendor's room and told him he'd never be asked back. He hasn't been asked back. Cinema Wasteland jam-packs a show of programming. There are always at least two things going on at once. A typical Saturday has over 16 hours of films and events, and many of the movies are shown on 16mm prints, real film. Boy, that's great for a horror junkie and a movie junkie. With that said, Cinema Wasteland is geared towards a taste of hardcore fans of drive-in cinema. Everyone's welcome, but if you're used to convention-themed movies being John Carpenter's Halloween, you might be in for a shock. The headliner for the show I go to is a reunion of the cast and crew of the 1987 horror exploitation cult film Street Trash. Not ringing any bells for some of you? Let me clarify in case you might have missed this one. Street Trash is a cult midnight movie that takes place in an area lower Manhattan that's populated by the homeless and winos. A tainted wine called Tenafly Viper hits the streets. How bad is it tainted? Anyone who drinks Tenafly Viper melts in spectacular and hideous fashion, or they explode. And that's pretty much the plot. It's actually both much better and much meaner than the plot sounds. It's pretty stylish for the budget, and the comedy in the film has a certain New York cruelty. It really matches the gore. Now, most conferences might have a side table for a movie like this, but they'd never risk banking ticket sales on Street Trash. Here they do. That's unique. That's ballsy. But what kept standing out for me was how everyone talked about the show attendees as family. The guys in Chicago used the term, and Ken used the term in online interviews. Did people keep returning to Cinema Wasteland because the company they got to keep was so good? So I fly into Cleveland the night before the show starts. I start a conversation with my cab driver, who informs me that Cleveland is the number 2 city for human trafficking in the United States. Oh boy. But then the conversation turns, because he finds out that I'm there for Cinema Wasteland. He goes, "We love you guys." Excellent news. I enter the Holiday Inn. Vendors are already there setting up in the vendor's room. I head into the bar to get some food before I try to beat jet lag. And that brings me to the bar. People talked about the bar like it was El Dorado. Even Ken mentioned the bar as one of the show activities on an online interview. At most cons, the centerpiece is the vendor's room. At Cinema Wasteland, it's the bar. Because after programming ends, the show is just beginning. What is Cinema Wasteland like after hours? I'll do a comparison. Finding the guys I talked to all night at the Chicago show was like finding the cool kids that smoke behind the high school. Cinema Wasteland is an entire high school filled with those kids. And after hours, the conversations start in the bar until the bar overflows. So I sit down in the bar. There are groups of folks dressed in metal and horror t-shirts at tables. My first great surprise, the bartending staff, is really happy to see Cinema Wasteland attendees. I find out that some of the hotel staff have actually become fans themselves over the years. My second great surprise, the bar happens to have the greatest jukebox in the world. There's an endless stream of amazing horror-themed heavy metal playing over the speakers, as well as Alice Cooper and Warren Zevon. About that time, some other late travelers enter the bar. It might be 30 years later, but I recognize a few of the stars of Street Trash. Jane Arakawa, Mike Lackey, and producer Roy Frumke sit at the bar. I buy them drinks. They're very surprised and really grateful and thank me a lot. They offer me a seat, but I give them space to wind down. For the rest of the weekend, they remember me, and every time I see them, they talk to me at length. I found that all the celebrities in attendance were the same way. David Naughton, probably the most mainstream name at the show, got stuck in a broken elevator with me. As we waited for the doors to finally open, he reached over to shake my hand. "Hi, I'm Dave." A celebrity introducing himself to me. That was a first. The programming during the show was wonderfully diverse and wonderfully politically incorrect. This is exploitation, after all. William Griffey, the king of Florida exploitation films, was one of the special guests. His movies include Whiskey Mountain and Mako, The Jaws of Death, and Stanley, the rattlesnake version of Willard. Both Whiskey Mountain and Stanley were shown on 16mm prints, and Griffey did Q&A sessions. Someone asked him if he kept any souvenirs from his movies. "Yes, I got one from Stanley," he said. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a rattlesnake skin wallet, made from the movie star. I met Mike Watt and Amy Lynn Best, a Pittsburgh-based husband and wife movie-making team. They happily spent time talking about making movies with no budget. They were open about some of the challenges. They also let me know how doors can open for you if you just treat people nicely. Look them up on their Facebook page. It's Happy Cloud Pictures. I talked to Bill Zebub, the crazy king of B-movies. His movies have titles like Kill the Scream Queen, the worst horror movie ever made. That's the title, not my statement. And Dick Shark. Yes, Dick Shark. As one would expect, Bill has no pretensions. As he says on his website, being original doesn't mean being brilliant. What it means is to make something that doesn't copy anyone else. He was full of self-deprecating humor and some hilarious stories. I think he's impossible to offend. We talked about his movie Scienceless Fiction, which had the honor of emptying the Cinema Wasteland screening room in 10 minutes. That was 5 minutes longer than it took at a Vancouver convention. Everyone I met, whether a vendor or celebrity or fan, was approachable and easy to talk to. People came up to start conversations with me. But the highlight, and what I really look forward to, was the bar after hours. Booze flowed by the buckets, and some people carried mugs that could be buckets. But tempers didn't flare. Everywhere you looked, there were animated conversations. There was laughter. Even the bar staff was smiling. Whatever we all came for, we were finding it there. We were recharging ourselves, expressing ourselves, and being legitimized for it. Each night, I lost my voice just from talking. Talking. Each night got later and later. The conversations got deeper and deeper. I got a total of 6 hours sleep over 3 days. Now, this seems like a good place to introduce the Algonquin Round Table of Horror. Some of the people I'll mention in this will probably be shocked they're members of anything, let alone something called the Algonquin Round Table of Horror. Truth be told, I named this close-knit group of horror enthusiasts after I met them, so the title is as informal as the group is. But I like it, and I think I can make it stick. Every one of them is actively involved in horror by either writing regular columns for magazines, publishing magazines, creating world-class artwork, creating webcasts and films, performing in death metal bands, or running popular horror websites. But the real connection is an absolute obsessive love for horror and exploitation films. They gather together to spread the gospel, one rousing conversation at a time. There's John Kitley, who maintains his own website, Kitley's Crypt. That's Crypt with a K. He's also a regular columnist for Horror Hound magazine and writes for Evil Speak magazine. He truly has an encyclopedic knowledge of horror from the 1930s to the present. I'm in awe. Dig this. He sells horror reference books at conventions. Books! Another member is Brian Martinez, who creates and produces his own original webcast called The Giallo Room. He also made a short horror film and action films around Chicago. He may be the definitive scholar for the horror film Demons. He is certainly the most obsessed. He's a really nice guy, although I'm sure he's a little crazy. There's also artist Matt Putrid Carr. Now, Putrid Matt creates tremendously detailed and imaginative artwork. If you listen to death metal and hardcore, you've probably seen his album art. Gore and decay are his mediums of choice. His art is the epitome of horrible beautiful. There's Ryan Olson from Michigan, who works for Synapse Films, as well as being the owner of both Dead Speak Design and a member of the band called The Cold Beyond. He can also fall asleep sitting upright, suddenly wake up, and deliver a soliloquy about the stupidity of the Dawn of the Dead remake without skipping a beat. Then there's Billy and Vanessa Nocera, who publish Evil Speak magazine. They're also members of the death metal band Surgikill. And from New Jersey comes Damian Glonick, co-creator of the Living Dead dolls. These are unique and wonderful collectible dolls that come in casket-shaped boxes. Then there's Brian Schuessler, known as Shu. He's an essayist and writer for Shuisms, a horror exploitation and cult film website. Then there's the team of Greg Olheiser and Jill Van from Poughkeepsie, who create and sell wonderful horror-themed clothing. Greg is tremendously quick-witted and razor-sharp in his knowledge of film, and he has the great ability to cut arguments to shreds and do it with a smile. And then, from Wisconsin, comes Dave Kosanke, the creator of the long-running and legendary underground fanzine Liquid Cheese. It is an exhaustive love letter to everything from horror to heavy metal to XXX films. Since 1993, Dave has been a one-man army. He puts the whole thing together himself. The words labor, love were made for Dave Kosanke and Liquid Cheese. As you can tell, there's a lot of passion and a lot of work being done. Nobody's getting rich on this. These are labors of love. Of course, all good things come to an end, and the weekend came to a close. We all said our goodbyes. Since I had to fly out, I had one last night in the hotel after the show ended. I sat in the bar, waiting for my late dinner, just like the first night. Such a different vibe. Everyone's sitting quietly alone, while easy listening music plays on the jukebox, the same jukebox that played metal all weekend and was dubbed the world's greatest jukebox. The waitresses are no longer walking around with big smiles for the folks they openly said they wait to see each April and October. The bar is completely and utterly neutral to the eye. Normal. The only sign of the crazy and joyous energy that was there just 3 hours ago is a table with about 100 stacks of postcards for horror websites and podcasts, open calls for ultra-low-budget horror films and live events. The overnight cleaning staff will toss them in the garbage. And just like that, Cinema Wasteland is over. Until October. Thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. For you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/hellbentforhorror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me, and I thank you in advance. And thanks for listening. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. If you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Google Play. It really helps. Thanks a lot for listening. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast. It's now available on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can also keep up with Hellbent for Horror on iTunes at iTunes Podcast. That's on Twitter. You can find more on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and I'm on Twitter at Hellbent Horror. You can also find more info on my website, hellbentforhorror.com. Till next time, stay hellbent.